Our dear guests, that's a big honor for me to start our panel, and it was organized by the Rise Coalition of Ukraine. That's the biggest coalition of civil society NGOs in Ukraine working for the transparent and accountable reconstruction. That's a big honor for me that we have such a great panel with so distinguished, I will say, experts from all over the world and from Ukraine, from Rise Coalition. And before that, I'll like just to give a few words about the objective of the panel. So the workshop is to explore the efficient and transparent mechanism of Ukraine's recovery and reconstruction. And the conversation will lead us about the topic about the creation of the dream system and others, as well as various other sources for the reconstruction of Ukraine, like frozen Russian assets. We also have a distinguished expert on that on our panel. And I'll tell you that like a few days ago, I returned from the Berlin Ukrainian Recovery Conference, and what I heard there that the rapid damage and the needs for restoration of Ukraine, it estimated almost like 400 billions of dollars. And yeah, sure, in total, like 100 of agreements were signed with that conference with the international governments, with the Ministry of Restoration of Ukraine. But what's interesting that, for example, our ministry signed the agreement for 80 millions to restore housing, but we need like dozen more, and we need like 80 billions for that need. So yeah, sure. I also will say that it's very important that we have another source for future reconstruction, like Russian assets, and obviously that the great companies that civil society does that Russia must pay also will be discussed with that panel, with our workshop. And I think I could go directly to the introduction of our panelists. So our first speaker will be Alexei Doroghan. And Alexei, he is the former head of the Rise Coalition of Ukraine. And he also a CEO of, I would say, the biggest analytical think tank in Ukraine, Better Regulation Delivery Office, that works closely with the government, and they are preparing a lot of draft laws and a lot of, drafts of bylaws for the regulation reform in Ukraine. And our next distinguished speaker is Gavin Heyman, and David is Executive Director of Open Contracting Partnership, and OCP did a great impact and support a lot of dream system, of the creation of dream system, of our coalition, of involvement of civil society to the reconstruction of Ukraine. So on behalf of Ukrainian civil society, Gavin, thank you for that. Yuhani Grossman, I think a lot of you know Yuhani very, very good. So Yuhani is the head of Green Corruption and senior advisor for Central and Eastern Europe, Basel Institute of Governance. And we also give a big thanks on behalf of Ukrainian civil society to what Basel Institute did for the Agency of Restoration in Ukraine, for the procedures, for the transparent procedures for restoration of Ukraine. So Yuhani, thank you for that. And our last but not the least great speaker is Tetiana Hutor. She's, I would say, the leading expert in Ukraine. Now she's based in Washington, but she also leads a big analytical think tank based in Kyiv, the Institute of Legislative Ideas. She's a chairwoman of the institute, and she's mostly working on the anti-corruption policy. And I would say the major works she's now working on is confiscation confiscation of Russian assets. So we will be very thankful to you if you'll give us all of the secrets regarding that topic. I think we could move directly to the topic of the panel, and the topic of the panel is just and transparent financing of Ukraine's reconstruction. But before talking about the resources, the financial instruments, before that, I would like to ask Alexei that everybody talks about the Ukraine's reconstruction as winning the peace, and when martial law was introduced, the defense sector's operations became more closely to civil society. But the major question for you. So what about the winning the war, and which is an essential secret for reconstruction? I would say, can we use anti-corruption tools and anti-corruption measures to help Ukraine to win the war? Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. And by the way, I do the same thing all the time. When I'm moderating something or I'm interviewing someone, I forget to introduce myself. So I'll introduce Martina. Martina Boguslavets is the chair of the board of Rise Ukraine Coalition and head of Anti-Corruption Center Mezha. And now back to the question. I was just at a meeting with high-level representatives of one of the governments that support Ukraine, and they were asking us, civil society organizations, like, what are our blind spots? And unfortunately, this was the blind spot also for us and for most other civil society organizations, and it was defense policy. So we did a lot of reforms on transparency, on governance, on anti-corruption, on digital that you probably know about. But defense was left unattended to. Civil society overall and donor community did not focus that much on defense. And that kind of bites us now back because there is so much work in the defense. But now, what did we find when we started working with the Ministry of Defense and other stakeholders in the defense sector? We found that the issues are the same. It's the same issues that we focused on in civilian sectors. We're talking about bureaucracy, we're talking about accountability, transparency, digital transformation, and we know how to do that, right? NGOs, donors in Ukraine know how to deal with those issues, know how to deal with streamlining procedures, reducing red tape, reducing opportunity for corruption, making things more transparent and accountable. So it appears if the problems are the same, means the solutions are the same, means we could use the anti-corruption toolkits that we have developed, that we know how to use, and apply them in the defense sector. And maybe not only the civil society organizations need to do that, maybe the international community needs also to focus on that. So my original plan was to come to a panel on financing Ukrainian reconstruction, and then talk to you about defense, because you're stuck here anyway, and maybe I can burst the bubble of anti-corruption and get anti-corruption to do defense as well, because a lot of governments will tell you, oh, defense, we're not allowed to do that. We have rules, we have regulations, our developmental agencies are under this and that ministry, and defense is no for us. And it appears to be a blind spot, and it appears that there can be a lot of impact if we do this right. We know how much support Ukraine is getting, and we're thankful for that in terms of material, and for relatively cheap. We could have completely asymmetrical results when we invest even a little in defense policy, in streamlining processes. And also, even in terms of anti-corruption and governance and stuff like that, soldiers deserve accountability. They deserve good procedures, good governance. They're the same part of the society as everyone else. This is also governmental bureaucracy in a way. So whatever we can do, and I think we need to do better as Ukrainian civil society to deal with those issues, applying anti-corruption tools. We need to do that, and I also suggest that the international community and other organizations should also look at defense as a focus point for governance, anti-corruption, even transparency reforms. And I'll probably leave a cliffhanger here, and next time I'm talking, I'm going to tell you all about what is being done in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei, very much. I would also would like to mention that we have the sister workshop on Friday, and I will be very glad if you'll come to that workshop, because all the things that Alexei has mentioned, that yeah, the soldiers, they really need the accountability in their own work. I mean, we'll have this, I mean, the same topic on the reconstruction regarding the local integrity, and it will take place on Friday. The QR code for that workshop is on the scene, so you can check it by your iPhones, and we'll be very grateful if you'll come. Regarding the accountability, Gavin, well, there are a few very important already existing digital systems in Ukraine, like Prozoro for procurement system, and Prozoro, for example, took like a lot of international awards for the accountability, and it saved us millions of hryvnias even in 2023. So the same thing like Prozoro was create a dream system, a digital system for reconstruction, I would say, was prepared and was created for the reconstruction process in Ukraine, and OCP office, I mean, did a lot for that. So my main question for you will be regarding what are the main advantages of the dream, and could you explain us, will it lead us to the total transparency of the reconstruction? Thank you.
Thank you. So great questions. And first up, I just want to say that I'm representing our amazing team in Kiev who couldn't be here, but wanted to pay tribute to their incredibly hard work and the work they're doing both with government and civil society to conceive of DREAM. So as the Open Contracting Partnership, you know, Ukraine's always had a very special place in our heart, particularly, as you were saying, for the early reforms. When Open Contracting Partnership was very new in its life, came across the incredible team who were working on the Prozoro Open Contracting reforms of Ukraine. And so that unique collaboration across civil society, in and outside of Ukraine, with the government to rethink and drive really radical reforms is what inspires the spirit of the DREAM project. And so DREAM is the digital restoration ecosystem for accountable management. And at its heart, it's a civil society and government collaboration, sort of led by the Ministry for Restoration, the Agency for Restoration, really to leverage like Ukraine's unique ecosystem of open data and open government like innovations to join them up effectively to sort of follow the entire chain of planning, proposing and delivering reconstruction projects. So that's the kind of conception of it. Sometimes when I'm talking internationally about DREAM, people say, but the reconstruction, you know, why now, right? And obviously it's vital for Ukraine to win the war, of course, and that's super important. At the same time, let's be honest, right? Russia is seeking to annihilate Ukrainian statehood and identity, right? It's deliberately targeting civilian infrastructure to make the country unlivable. So actually reconstructing and making the country more livable is an act of defiance. It's a way of fighting back against Russia, and it's equally important to the war effort that Ukraine remains resilient and a country that children can be brought up in and everything else. So it's really important to think about this now. There are over, in the State Register of Damages, 200,000 plus damaged objects, right? From small things to maybe children's like playgrounds through to major bridges and everything else. So we need to think about those and think about an orderly and coherent process for prioritizing them and also following the entire chain of national and international money to make sure stuff's built back and built back in the best way it can be, and where possible built back better and everything else. So DREAM is really the umbrella system that joins together all those different government systems. So you have lots of different innovations. Some amazing people in the room are supporting certain parts of the government. So there's everything, for example, there's the state e-construction system. That was something, obviously, the US government and DI and others helped sort of build and support in the past. There is the GIS system, which is obviously the geographic reference system. There's the state register for damages and everything else. So DREAM is the system, if you like, that joins them together. And thank you. Here we go. These wonderful people have beamed DREAM, the actual system, the portal, if you like, on the board. And it's easily accessible. You can download it yourself. It's dream.gov.ua that you can go and see it and everything else. And it joins together all the information so you can see what's going on. You can click on individual projects. And at its heart, the idea is that every single project for the reconstruction will we'll have, thank you, we'll have a single identity that allows you to follow it through all the various different government systems. And each project will have its own individual profile that allows you to see where that project's got to and everything else. And at the moment, a lot of the actual stages of planning and delivering the reconstruction are taking place offline or in individual government systems. DREAM is the way that then they can be joined together, that people can kind of follow the money and follow the flow of decisions around the reconstruction and everything else. As well as a project by project level of what's going on with individual projects, there's also business intelligence tools and analytics that enables you to actually look at the whole flow of decision making. And you can create different profiles depending whether you're a donor government and you're following your projects and your money being spent by the Ukrainian government. You might be the Ministry for Restoration or one of these regional agencies, or you might be a particular local government who just wants to understand where your projects are, what you're prioritizing and everything else. And currently, there are more than 5,000 projects in DREAM. They're worth about $4 billion. About half of those are funded. And it's officially a test system of the government of Ukraine under the Agency for Restoration. We are really hoping it will be fully institutionalized. I think that's one of the super important next steps for DREAM and everything else. And so, yeah, if you look at the users, there's over 1,000 communities have their own individual projects in DREAM. There are local and regional governments. There are 5+ ministries and all the different elements of the State Agency for Reconstruction and everything else. There's lots of different users directly using DREAM now to transact and sort of plan, deliver projects and follow the money. And I'll just sort of close with my reflections that we started with the idea of the transparency in following the money, because obviously that's existential. Ukraine is going to need international support to win the war. It needs to show the money's been spent really effectively, and this is vital that Ukraine does that. But what's been so interesting is thinking through the way DREAM can work. It can be so much more than that. So one of the things that's really valuable about it is become a sort of single digital pipeline for planning and delivering projects. And that's amazing because that gives you incredible efficiency gains. And then secondly, it's also really interesting about how you can change the power dynamics around reconstruction. So allowing small communities a voice in actually proposing projects and making sure they get kind of matched to donor profiles. So really interesting. It doesn't have to be one state agency picks all the projects the most important. Communities can propose projects and elevate them and DREAM, and then they can meet different international or government funding criteria to get those projects funded. And that's a really kind of important change, perhaps, in how we conceive about reconstruction. It's not just top down, it can be bottom up as well. So I think that's fantastic. And then lastly, what's also interesting is the government's now saying, this works the reconstruction. Can it work for all our major infrastructure projects? So it's going through its transition now. It's in the government's public investment management plan. So it's super exciting. I see we have the minister here from Liechtenstein for infrastructure. A radical idea of all your projects in one pipeline that everyone can see and follow. That idea that's really quite transformational about how we think about infrastructure going forward. So that, if you like, is a nutshell of how DREAM is currently working. And there's a lot more user improvements and user testing with communities to further develop those functionalities.
Thank you, Gavin, so much. I would say that all of that digital systems and the digitalization on its own, I'm sure that's a part of the anti-corruption reform. And that's definitely the anti-corruption instrument and anti-corruption measure. But Juhani, every single day we hear that all of those issues about the failed corruption status Ukraine, and we know that Russian propaganda pays a lot of money to get the message to the whole world. You as an international expert, how you could assess, I would say, from your perspective, how you assess the real level of corruption in Ukraine, and what should be done next to proceed in the fight against the corruption? Would you be sincere with us and give us all of the information? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Is this working? Testing? No. It's too fancy. Oh, now it's working. Okay. Yeah, I was a little bit intimidated by it, and that hasn't changed. Well, the original draft didn't include anything about sincerity, but I'll do my best. Uh, so, yes, the propaganda is, of course, strong, and I mean, I see the room. Many are, in fact, experts on corruption and anti-corruption in Ukraine, so this won't be news to you. But the fact that Ukraine is at war certainly has not distracted it from the fight against corruption. If anything, at least in my experience, and I was counting the years when I first moved to Ukraine and started working on anti-corruption, and it's just shy of 20 years. So I'm dating myself, but I'm giving it to you as context in the sense that the last 2 years, in my experience, have perhaps been the most productive in the fight against corruption, which is really astonishing considering what Ukraine deals with every day. And it is yet another way in which it differentiates itself from its northern neighbor. So to go into a little bit more detail on this summary, we have also published a recent report together with Transparency International Ukraine for the Ukraine Recovery Conference. It's sort of a 10-page summary of the main progress elements in the fight against corruption. It's online, but there are also a few copies in the second row there if you want to take some. So broadly speaking, what are the highlights that we have seen lately? Thank you very much. The first thing that I want to highlight, and some of you might have seen these issues in the news over the last 6 months, is that there's proof that the anti-corruption system in Ukraine works. And that proof is, as they say, in the pudding. And the pudding in this particular case are politically painful law enforcement efforts. So you might have heard there were efforts at bribing the political leadership of the restoration efforts to identify particular projects for preferential treatment. These were scooped up. These corrupt folks were scooped up in a sting operation, and these were senior officials from parliament, from state-owned enterprise, from the private sector that had political connections. So they were at the level of seniority where it hurts. And so for me, that is always a very good sign in the countries that I work in when people who have political connections get arrested for corruption. That means the system is working. But beyond these episodic issues, we also see systemic progress. We see, for example, the Special Anti-Corruption Prosecutor's Office obtaining its own legal identity, which was a reform that had been called for a long time. We see a rejuvenation in the leadership of the independent anti-corruption entities in Ukraine. That's always a crucial step when you go from the first generation of leaders to the second generation of leaders. They were conducted with incredible transparency, something I think many of us in Western countries would, I don't know if we would envy it, but we could probably learn from it. And we also see that some initial wartime reversals that were being put in place in regards to the asset registry and procurement transparency, they have been gradually brought back. So most of these limitations have been removed. In the judiciary, long a laggard in the anti-corruption space, we also see significant change in regards to the qualification assessment of judges, in regards to the dissolution of a long-suffering, highly corrupt district court in Kiev, in the strengthening of the independent high anti-corruption court that deals with both sanctions, confiscations, and corruption issues. Now the number of judges and the capacity of the court has been increased to handle the throughput of the much increased casework. So all put together, we're looking at of course, a country that still has corruption, so that hasn't disappeared anywhere. In case you were thinking I'm starting to tell fairy tales, I'm not saying there's no corruption in Ukraine, but I'm saying that the system to handle the corruption levels that exist in Ukraine is very robust and has gotten increasingly robust over the last 2 years and is well placed to handle it. A further point I would make is that even in areas that have been traditionally resistant to anti-corruption reforms, and Alexei pointed at one of them that he will talk in more detail, so I won't do that, the defense sector, but also others like forestry, like railways. These are sectors that haven't gone through a lot of the high visibility anti-corruption reforms like procurement that we've seen in Ukraine, but they are starting, so that's also a big deal. Having said that, of course, if you've been following the news, there's a certain amount of turmoil that's taking place. And so, if you will, this 2-year anti-corruption honeymoon is coming to an end, perhaps. And as all mature marriages, we have to be honest and serious about the outstanding issues. And of course, one of the key concerns is converting these political achievements from the last 2 years into robust systems that cannot be easily reversed. And so DREAM, of course, as Gavin was saying, is a very important element of that. But there are many other laws and progress tools that I will go into detail in a little bit later. Thank you.
Thank you, Johanny. You mentioned the defense system. I mean that the anti-corruption efforts, like 2 hours ago. So our team was doing a big report on the state anti-corruption program regarding the defense system, what the Ministry of Defense is doing for that, and they did a great job. I mean, they're trying to do something at least. And we're also trying, I mean, the whole Ukrainian society trying to do something with the confiscation of Russian assets. And we constantly see the petitions to international governments, to international partners to confiscate frozen assets. In addition, the demonstrations all over the world with the same demands, and it constantly taking place in different countries. At the same time, some countries are afraid of that, and maybe they are fearing the confiscation of assets that would undermine the confidence in the Western financial system or something. We have, I think, the best expert in that topic in Ukraine, Tetiana Hutor. So I'll ask you a very short question, but I mean the direct one. Are Ukraine and Ukrainians doing enough to get Western support for seizing Russian assets, and why? Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. Thank you for your words. Thank you for the panelists and the audience who came today and listened about our Ukrainian things and now Russian. So I would start. We are talking about anti-corruption, and I would start with the anti-corruption things because I'm the head of Ukrainian legal think tank. We work with anti-corruption, with sanction, with efficient reparation. The last 2 years, I spent much of my time talking about the money, about the resources, and the resources of aggressor state, and those who fund this aggression to make the reconstruction possible. Two previous years, I used to talk about the reconstruction, about compensation. Now, I started to talk about the money for the defense, because otherwise, without this money, Ukraine will not exist in maybe in a few years. Because what I see now, I'm acting as a visiting professor of practice in one of the American university, Schar School of Policy and Government. I talk to people there, and I'm not happy what I'm hearing from them. So sometimes they are just started to say that, you know, that's the end for Ukraine. I would say, wow, why is the end for Ukraine? Because you're not get funding. Because US is not ready to give you more money, and EU don't want to do that as well. I say that it's not official position. It's just like one of the head of the think tanks. Of course, I have an answer for that, but still, we have this information. People start to talk about it, and we don't have to agree on it, but we have to take it and to understand what we can do with it. So usually I'm talk about the confiscation of Russian money on the panels, on the conference, high-level conference, not a high-level conference, expert conference, and the second or the third question I usually get is, oh, Ukraine is so corrupt. Don't you fear that if we confiscate this money and give it to Ukraine, it would be stolen? And just I'm happy now that we have so many sources. I used to talk about Dream, I used to talk about Prozora and all these instruments, but now I'm happy that this Monday, Institute of Legislative Ideas, at the focal point from the civil society, released a big report regarding the overall situation with all preventive instruments and asset recovery regarding Ukraine. What Ukraine has done in course of implementation of UNCAC Convention, this UN Convention against Corruption. So all the super basic and important things, what Ukraine has done. If you have some time for 140 pages, I invite you to read it. We have the monitoring platform, and we uploaded this big report. We have a summary. Thanks to UNCAC Coalition, we have a summary, and you can read through all the information, started from the anti-corruption policy and finishing with asset recovery. It was not only our position, it was not only, oh great, Ukraine doesn't have any corruption. No, unfortunately we have some. We have many problems, but we have many achievements. I would say that it was a cursed project. I hated it, really, because we started it in 2021. We started to assess all these spheres in Ukraine, starting with anti-corruption policy, finishing with judiciary, the transparency in procurement and asset recovery. We interviewed more than 50 experts and expert organization in each field. We interviewed the people from the public officials from the governmental agencies. We interviewed the ex-public officials. We had so many interviews. We had a survey we surveyed around 100 investigative journalists all around Ukraine. So we did a great job. We had a plan to present it together with NACP in March 2022. Can you imagine what happened? And the situations changed dramatically. But what we saw, that so many achievements and so many indicators would just drop down. And we saw okay, all this work, we can throw it away because it is not actual anymore. But in 2023, in 2024, we updated all the information. And now I'm happy to announce, please guys, read it through and you'll get the understanding what is going on. So it's about corruption and anti-corruption. And I'm happy to say that now I have evidence, and I will put this report in the hands of all these people who are talking about this corruption and all that. But let's start from now I start to talk about Russian money. So according to our data and official data, unfortunately, I'm not happy to say that, but we have a really deep hole in our budget if we're talking about even about the defense. So everyone waits for Ukraine just something incredible, giving us money, of course, but as for today, the Russian defense budget is 3 times higher than Ukrainian one. And we have companies, international companies, they're paying, that has paid in taxes the same sum that Ukraine has for the defense in our budget. So I think that it's really ironic, it's a cruel irony that we have this situation. We can talk a lot about the support of Ukraine, but many things depends on the money, all things depends on the money. So we are really happy that as for now, we are starting to talk about using aggressor state assets for supporting Ukraine. Because after 2 years of the war, it's time to think how we can put the burden of finance, the defense, and Ukrainian aid from the taxpayers, Western taxpayers, partially Ukrainian taxpayers, to those who funding this aggression. So we may talk about the Russian state, about the people who evade sanctions, who circumvent sanctions, companies that circumvent sanctions, and and companies who are staying in Russian market. So I'm happy to announce. I hope that you heard this news that G7, and especially I have to thank our US partners who pushed for this idea and for the giving the loan backed by Russian assets, the profits that are gained from this $300 billion that everyone is talking about. And Ukraine will be able to get $50 billion in next year due to this future profits that were gained from this principle of frozen Russian money. That's the answer. For us, that's great. Why? Because that's the answer how Ukraine will survive in the next year, in 2025. But there is another question that everyone is afraid of. What are we going to do in 2026, in 2027? So that's why the question of frozen Russian money and using frozen Russian money in future periods is not the question like if we can't do that. We have to do that. We have to create the there are answers from the greatest international lawyers of this world. They are saying that that's okay. We have the legal answers for that questions. From the financial part and from talking about financial issues, there are answers for that. So there is it's the necessity. It's not the answer question anymore. It's a necessity. Thank you.
Tatiana, how many pages you said?
140.
That's too much.
But we have a summary, like 8 pages.
Oh, I like it more.
And monitoring platform, you can just click, close, open, close. So just you have so many options.
Yeah, 8 pages sounds better. Thank you. Thank you so much for the whole for the whole information, for the whole thing you gave to us. I would ask Alexei. So I also will give a short secret to our audience. I know that your think tank is closely working on the procedures, on the bylaws for the Ministry of Defense, doing their procedures more transparent, I would say. So my main question to you will be what Ukraine is doing on behalf of the civil society, on behalf of the think tanks, on behalf of the government, to learn by heart the lessons from, I would say, anti-corruption reform and on the reform that you're right now doing with the Ministry of Defense on the transparency of their procedures to finally, I would say, win the war and, and put the main instruments and could that be possible to put the main anti-corruption instruments and tools to the main tools of winning the war?
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah? Okay. So now for the remainder of the cliffhanger, right? I promised you I'm going to tell you how we're using anti-corruption lessons and tools to improve how the armed forces function. So there is a big bunch of people that worked in anti-corruption and in governance reforms that now working in defense. They're changing how procurement is done. Procurement reformers from pro-Zorro times and from centralized procurement reforms are building now a procurement reform for the defense, and the issues are very similar. So that's a very simple lesson, right? So we know how to do procurement reforms. nobody did them for the defense. Now we are reapplying those lessons for the defense. And I think the first results are in, and I think the procurement reform in the defense is doing great. So we have centralized procurement, we have accountable and reasonably transparent procedures, and seems like we are resolving one of the issues, which was, let's face it, corruption in defense procurement. And corruption in defense procurement in a country at war is a very big deal. It's a very systemic issue. So we absolutely need to address that. And I'm glad to report that Birdo is not doing any of that procurement stuff. It's other people, both in the Ministry of Defense, in the armed forces, and also in the think tank community that are working on that. I feel like if we started that years ago, maybe we would have better results. But still, but now, what are other issues that we are addressing as a country in defense with anti-corruption tools? Now, there is a process called conscription when people join the army, and that process, until recently, was 99% paper. So you've got lines of people updating their data. You've got small. You had trouble with doing the peaks of demand when people wanted to join the army as volunteers, and when some people dropped off. Like my personal experience is that I went to a conscription center in the west of Ukraine a couple of times, and I never could have got into. And they told me, just go to Kiev, man. You're in the west. Go to Kiev and deal with those, because there was a lot of people standing in line, and we lost a bunch of people that could have joined the army because our processes were not the best. And you know what Ukraine is famous for? Digital. So why don't we use digital to make this process more efficient, more transparent, more accountable, and just plain better? And this is what is being done. The register for people that can be conscripted has been expanded. It has been improved. There are now integrations with other systems to allow for better profiling, for smart mobilization, to better use the skills, experience, professional and education of people that are joining the army, so that they can have maximum impact possible. We're doing an app, a mobile app, I can show you right now, which has been installed by 2 million of Ukrainians, that shows their conscription status, and through the app they can avoid standing in lines and going through paper-based procedures when updating their data, for instance. And it's been launched just 2 months ago, and now it's 2 million Ukrainians have it. So digitizing conscription process is also a big deal, and this is made possible, surprisingly, maybe a bit, by the success of previous anti-corruption and digital reforms in Ukraine. So I think Face ID has trouble recognizing me with the mic. Give me a sec. Yeah, so this is how it looks, and it has QR codes and stuff. It's not DIA, it's a different app, but I would say it's a pretty low-hanging fruit, right? We should have done this years ago, but we're only doing it now. Now, I told you about the lines. You know what has been launched a month ago? Electronic lines. So you can have a number, like you have a time slot, and you can come to a conscription center at your time slot and not stand in line for the whole day. HR processes and recruitment centers have been launched in the armed forces to also improve the experience of people joining the army, and also make sure that they have the job that they are that best utilizes their experience and knowledge. Now, exemptions from military draft for essential workers. You know what process is until this day paper-based? Exemptions. So you have essential workers, people that put out fires, people that police the streets, stuff like that. And all of that, and there is like a lot of people that need to be exempt from the military draft. And that process has corruption risks, surprisingly, right? People fake documents that they are exempt from a military draft. And even people that don't fake them, it takes like 2 months for the paperwork to travel throughout the different bureaucratic corridors for an exemption to be granted. So that's the process that is being digitized. on DIA portal, I think end of this month, beginning next month, this process will be done digitally, saving countless hours and allowing essential workers to be exempt from military draft. Again, made possible because Ukraine has done such things. It's like 50, 60, 70 services like that have already been launched. So now it's pretty simple, pretty easy, pretty cheap to launch additional services, even if they're like from a completely different domain, like defense. On other issues, as we're talking about digital systems, right? So people on the battlefield need situational awareness, and some battlefield systems need to be put into the cloud. Some of them need to be put into a foreign cloud, which was not allowed under Ukrainian law. So law has been changed that allows for the war to be better digitalized, for Ukrainian army to be able to process information faster and make better decisions on the ground, to make sure we are successful on the battlefield. Now, logistics. We talked about DREAM, which is very important, and we're privileged to help a bit on that. But on the material, like tanks, weapons, ammo, stuff like that, there also needs to be some accountability and some transparency. Our allies need to trust that we're using as a country what we are given effectively, without corruption and without any wrongdoing. So Ukraine has been building out logistics and accounting systems for tracking and for tracking and accounting for such material, so that international partners can have trust. So trust and accountability doesn't end at the line between civilian and defense. You need to have both to win the war and to win the peace. And what I want to show you with these examples is that, and I think to some countries at risk of Russian invasion or else, it would be also very interesting, right? Because the anti-corruption bubble focuses a lot on digital, on transparency, on accountability, on governance. And before the large-scale invasion, I thought that defense is completely different. It's something that I did not understand. It was a culture of secrecy. Something very, very important is going on. But like, who am I to work in defense, right? I have no defense background. I knew nothing about defense until 2 years ago or so. So turns out issues are the same: governance, processes, bureaucracy, transparency. It's like if you go and read, I don't know, Open Government Partnership website and reports, a lot of those issues are very relevant for defense. So I would once again, now that I have trapped you in the defense bubble for 1 minute more, I would ask you to think about how you could use your resources or your influence or your capacity to use some of the anti-corruption experience that you have, or anti-corruption activities that you have in Ukraine, but also abroad, to reuse some of that to make sure the Ukrainian and other armies are well prepared to fight the Russians. Because we need to have a democratic society, and that includes a bunch of different things that we need to have as a society. We also need to have a democratic army, because a democratic army can be better than the Russian army. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexei. Thank you for the last words. I mean, yeah, that's not a secret for anyone that we are, I mean, no jokes, the most digitalized country in the whole world. By the way, all of that things and talks about the failed corruption state and everything, but the digital system dream that we're talking the whole panel right now. I'm leading anti-corruption think tank, and I will give you, I mean, the sincere, my own thoughts. That's my own thoughts that a lot of, because of the Ministry of the Reconstruction, because of the team of Alexander Kubrakov, and because of the agency frustration, we could establish, we could put this start to the dream system. And I think that the Kubrakov team was dismissed because of the political issues, because of the political reasons, I would say. So whether it will become the challenges, the future challenges for the dream system, I would say whether the new minister will have the political will to give the dream system, let's say, life, yeah? And do you think that whether international experts and whether international partners have the enough trust to dream system to put the project frustration to the dream system? Thank you.
These are great questions. So let me try to first say, I guess, you're absolutely right, right? The change with, like Deputy Prime Minister Kubrakov and everything else definitely is leading to questions being asked. So I think the single most important thing now is thinking about how we institutionalize DREAM. I think that's absolutely vital. I think there's some hope in the fact that DREAM is not just a test system of the agency, it's in the public investment roadmap for the Ministry of Finance and solves a lot of problems for them and for others and can be a really powerful tool. So I think I'm keen to see that leadership continue, I think is the best way to describe it. And I think that's a vital challenge for the DREAM project. You touched on the other one, which is about will donors use it as well? And so there's really good news, actually, recognizing there's been some great testing of that. So when we started with the whole DREAM idea, people were like, you are mad, this will never happen. The World Bank will never use this and everything else. But it's been interesting to see how that narrative has changed. So you have the European Investment Bank and others now actively supporting DREAM and putting their projects on it and everything else. And there's a lovely example of, it was the Ministry of Education working with UNICEF, so the UN Children's Agency, around, it's the school shelters program, so subterranean schools effectively to make sure the children are safe and everything else. And so what would have taken the Ministry of Education at least 6 months to run that program probably took place about 1 month using DREAM. So effectively, they were able to proactively identify who's got projects already that fit the criteria for funding for subterranean schools, and then let's contact them and say, hey, great, there's a funding source here. There's some documents you might need to submit. You can upload them through DREAM. Actually, in one case, I think the application was ready and submitted in 5 minutes because all the documentation was already there in terms of the government e-contracting systems and construction system and everything else. So effectively, it's been a really good test of DREAM, using that as a kind of leading example. And effectively 100 school projects were authorized, and now another batch have come through very rapidly. So it looks like that donor functionality is being tested and so far is working. There's another test coming up with the World Bank Hope project, which is about shelters and housing, that's going to be testing and using that DREAM. So the way of, if you like, intermediating between international donors, Ukrainian authorities, and local communities to really kind of rethink reconstruction. So I'm kind of excited by that. I completely hear you on the institutionalization piece and seeing it kind of written to law. And then I would say 2 things there. So as Open Contracting Partnership, we're in the change business. We're not in the tech business. We're not just building a portal for the government. We're working with the government systematically to strengthen institutions, using DREAM as a tool that creates agency and creates change around that. So one of the great things actually about the funding we've had from the UK government and the US, and thank you those of you in the room are connected to them, has been around institutional strengthening. So actually we heard a great example of that from a lady who was on the Agency of Restoration yesterday, where effectively the agency has been going through procurement transformation. So they've been doing things like standardized contracts, they've been doing pre-market engagement and vendor outreach to sensitize people about contracts coming, more visibility around the pipeline. And they're seeing that the tenders that they run for agency projects are more competitive and appear to have better savings than equivalent tenders run by other agencies and parts of the government in Ukraine. So we need that systematic investment, not only in the law, but the training and support for everyone around reconstruction. And one of the great things about DREAM, you can now see where projects are getting stuck. So you could reach out to communities and say, hold on a minute, you seem to be struggling with some of the documentation. Let's give you training and support. So really ramping up the training and support offer through Dream seems really important now to put those tools into communities' hands. And then we obviously do a lot of community engagement. The feedback from communities is like kind of about between the sort of high 80s to 90% kind of positive engagement. Would you recommend using Dream to submit projects and transact with the government that way? So that's really good. The other key actor and is just recognize the incredibly powerful role civil society has played in strengthening Ukraine institutions. So obviously BRDO have been a core ally and collaborator on the Dream project. The RISE coalition was the instigation of the whole Dream vision. Everything else, TI Ukraine have been an amazing partner. So making sure that Dream strengthens their work to hold governments, agencies to account and make sure the government delivers, but also how the information from Dream can be used and leveraged by civil societies. There's that big recovery portal. There's You Control. There's all these great civic tech initiatives that really can build off Dream and are connecting to it to further leverage that information ecosystem, which again strengthens the whole resilience of Ukraine and also kind of makes sure that Ukraine kind of is building the values that it wants to have when it wins the war. So it's kind of building the country fit for the heroes on the battlefield, which I think is really important. So it's that whole systemic change is the thing that we are working and collaborating systematically with the government on, and which is so important we make sure that focus continues as we roll Dream out.
Thanks, Gavin. Yuhani, whether I understand correctly that no matter what, we need the law to make the Dream system obligatory for every single project, and not only Dream system, but a lot of another anti-corruption measures for the reconstruction. Well, I'll tell you the story. It was the 1st of the January. Nice beginning. The 1st of the January 2023, and we have the RISE coalition team Zoom with the Ministry for Restoration, and 1 year and a half ago. And at that time, so we understood that we need the common law on the reconstruction of Ukraine. And the ministry promised us and the MPs that were at the Zoom that they will they will put to the parliament such a law. And the promises were they will register that in the parliament to the end of 2023. And now we are now in the half year of the year 2024, and it's not in the parliament even right now. So what do you think about that draft law on the reconstruction of Ukraine, and what kind of anti-corruption measures should definitely be in that law to make the reconstruction process of Ukraine more transparent and accountable? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. And yes, this picks off where I left off earlier, right? The need to ensure that the gains that have been made, the tools that have been developed, become mandatory, become obligatory, and not the question of political whim. And I would, of course, stress the fact that because I think sometimes people still think when we talk about Ukraine restoration, we're talking about something far away, right? We're not talking about something in the future. We're talking about something that's happening now to maintain Ukraine's ability to function as a state. So this is not an abstract question. It's a very practical question, and money, including donor money, of course, is being invested as we're speaking in this. And Gavin already mentioned the very significant benefits of Dream. Of course, enshrining these in law would be crucial, but there are additional developments that are quite important. One is a project selection methodology that has been developed by numerous stakeholders. It was really sort of a team effort involving civil society, multilateral donors, and the Ministry of Infrastructure. So it's a very sophisticated selection system that scores project proposals, infrastructure project proposals on the basis of a whole range of criteria and priorities, and it takes away the subjective element of project selection, and of course thereby drastically reduces corruption risks. So unfortunately so far, the utilization of this methodology is not mandatory, and including it in the law would be absolutely crucial. Of course, one is not naive about these things. You can't leave all project selection processes to an algorithm effectively. There are always going to be certain projects that are a priority that need to happen now. Projects like, for example, if the Kakhovka Dam was going to be rebuilt, would not fit into any normal project parameters. It's so complex. It takes into account so many factors, and so we understand that there will always be a certain percentage, hopefully a very small percentage, of projects that are selected outside of this project selection methodology. But when that happens, this needs to be done in an even more transparent way than the choosing of the other programs. So the ministry or the official that initiates a particular project outside of the methodology needs to be accountable, it needs to be transparent who they are and why they are proposing this project. By the way, the selection committee meetings for these projects are already public, but of course the motivation behind projects outside of the methodology are not yet public, so when that happens, that needs to be completely accountable as well. I think we've also, with the reset in the leadership of the Restoration Agency, we also have a moment when we can think a little bit about how it might need to be restructured a little bit. It has gone through a very rapid evolution about what project is it in charge of, what it is in fact in charge of, and that was very different when it was first created to where we are now. I imagine that will continue to change. And there are a number of structural issues inside that agency that need to be addressed for reforms to be sustainable. One of them being the appointment of the leadership of the agency that is not currently subject to the very high standards of leadership selection that anti-corruption agencies are to. I see that Viktor Pavlushik has joined us. He is the head of the National Agency for Corruption Prevention and has been the subject of this excruciating process, a selection process. But I think we have seen repeatedly that they produce excellent leaders. And so putting the Agency for Restoration's leadership through the same process is probably a worthwhile concept. And the final point I would make here is that it is currently a disconnected agency between the center and the regions. That is a challenge because the accountability at the central level has increased drastically for the restoration process, and the accountability at the regional level has not increased in a commensurate level. So integrating oversight structures between the regional, decentralized element and the central level is quite crucial. Thank you.
Thank you. So I think we already understood that we definitely need the law, yeah? We definitely need the legislation, the holistic legislation, I would say. Tatiana, you're not only an expert on the Russian asset confiscation, you're also a lawyer, yeah? So do we still need such legislation as we were talking about the reconstruction in the topic of confiscation of Russian money? And my question will be like to the lawyer, yeah? How do you assess the legal issues and what are the main, I would say, legal challenges for international partners, and about the possibility of such confiscation? So whether there is already such a legislation, international legislation, and whether there is already in Ukraine such a legislation for the confiscation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for a great question. As a lawyer, I would say, talking about the Russian assets, I used to say that, you know, of course, there are some legal obstacles on this way. But I always mention that I am a lawyer. I was the legislative director to the head of the Anti-Corruption Parliament Committee in Ukraine, when we tried to introduce the legislation on high anti-corruption court. Everyone was saying that we were insane. But we have politically we need it, and like practically we need it. That's why, as a lawyer, first I was oh God, what are we going to do? Just it's not like quite like maybe legally, and the request from the politicians were like from the head of the committee was, we need it. Okay, if we need it, we can do that. So usually we have two questions: whether are you ready to do that, whether you want to do that, whether we need to do that. It's like, if yes, the lawyers will find the right road to make it happen. If we don't want to do that, the lawyers will find so many obstacles on this way why we cannot do that. So as a lawyer, I say that the main thing is, and regarding this corruption issues, issues with funding, with legal obstacles on the way to the Russian money, it's all about political will. We have to start with political will. We saw the political will in the Agency of Restoration. Yeah, there was a political will, and I think the 40%, yes, maybe 40% of their resources were transferred for the transparency of these processes. I was teaching the anti-corruption officers of these regional reconstruction offices, and it was a really long course. First, when I was invited to be the trainer to this like long course, I said, wow, I never worked in this topic just like as an anti-corruption officer. How can I, like, what I can teach them? But happily there was something I could. The course was about anti-corruption policy, and what we did, we talked a lot. So it's like a quite maybe American approach. We talked a lot. They teach from each other, from me, something from me. Just we tried to find some answers for some really tricky questions. But the main thing was there is a lack of resources. They have to do so many things. They have so many obligations. They tried. You know what they were asking of me? I didn't have the vacation for these 2 years. I'm afraid that if I will go and have a vacation for 7 days, I don't, not like trust, but they don't understand what has to be done. And I'm afraid that for these 7 years, they will do some stupid things. Just they are not just like even lawyers, other people in the agency. I cannot just like give them these functions not because of lack of trust, because lack of their knowledge and capacity to do all these things that these anti-corruption officers are doing. But the problem is, there must be not only one anti-corruption officer who is responsible for everything. So that's why there is the problem of lack of resources. They know so many things. They can sit here and teach us and talking with you how to deal with corruption on the regional level. To be honest, they can do that. But so we have to understand, I want to switch a little bit from this to another thing, that now we're in that period when it's everyone understand that it is not war of 3 days. Yes, it will not be like a fast victory for each of the party of this war. So, and I know and I see that many people, many countries are tired of the war. Ukrainians are those who tired the most. But this period of war is war like of economies. So if you want to help Ukraine, if you want the end of this war without the direct intervention, without the direct defense help to Ukraine, then you have to fund Ukraine defense and bleed Russian economy. It's what we need to do. So as for today, our partner organization, the Financial Policy Resource Center, they have a great project. I think that the cost of war. They are showing all in each details, each contract, each contractor around Ukraine. You can find everything there. Each project, not project, budget, the contract. And as for today, there is the cost of the war. If we are talking about the expenses on restoration, about on support of the development of some critical infrastructure for people who were who moved from these damaged regions, like all this cost, it's around $187 billion. $187 billion is the cost of war for Ukraine that have already been paid. So what's interesting here, Euroclear, the depository in Europe, in Belgium, that everyone is talking about, where we can just get this frozen Russian money, it has less frozen Russian money than this sum. So that's why we have to think, as for today, where are we going to get the money? Because to be honest, one of my best students, like this anti-corruption officer from my course, had to leave this anti-corruption, Reconstruction office because of lack of the salary. She received, her salary was around more than $1,000. It was around $700. So can you imagine that the anti-corruption officer is getting this salary? So I believe that all those people are they are brilliant. People who work in anti-corruption, especially in Reconstruction, they are brilliant. What we need, we have the general issue of resources. So the first issue and the first task and our common goal is to find resources for Ukraine. The main one, I just mentioned, like I think 10 times for today, is frozen Russian money. It's not yours, it's not ours, but I think this money, they own us. They own us this money because talking about these legal obstacles, the brilliant international lawyers like Felix Zelikov, Summers, and others, they have already answered, guys, we have the theory, this concept of countermeasure. So you can get this money to compensate Ukraine. That's it. That is the answer. If we are talking about the fiscal risk, we have already talked about it. Some people are saying, not saying, just Saudi Arabia, China, some other states are trying to tell that, if you do that, we will take out our assets from your Eurozone, from US, and put it somewhere else. It's like totally untrue, because they have to find another jurisdiction where they can put their money. And another thing, this moment was 2 years ago when this Russian money were frozen in Euroclear, in around the world, in our and in other jurisdictions of our allies. So the real problem here is all about money, just business. So many companies are still operating in Russian market. They have assets there. They have companies there. Many of these companies have left Russian market on the very first few months after the full-scale invasion. But as for now, what we see, it's around $40 billion that were paid in taxes to Russia. $40 billion. And they are still paying these sums. So they don't want anything to be happen to the Russian frozen assets. Why? Because each move from US, from EU is followed by the move from Russian government. They starting to arrest their companies, to arrest their assets, and that's it. In fact, they're acting like a hostage of the situation. But they are lobbying their interest in European jurisdiction. They are lobbying their interest in US. It's much harder to lobby it in US because US has a strong position in it. So, but they are lobbying it. They're spending resources there. And the final hostage of the situation is Ukraine. Because these companies are operating there under some risk, but they are operating, they gain profits. But the only one is Ukraine, who's staying without money and without being funded. That's it. Sorry for such a long intervention.
No, thank you so much. I mean, you're totally right regarding the lack of the salaries for the Agency for Restoration. Moreover, they even the ministry increased imagine the thing. You are anti-corruption officer, you're working on the transfer and reconstruction on your region, and your salary is decreased from $700 to $300. So it was done, for the last 3 months or something. Yeah, and I remember the nights. So we used to work with Tatiana together in the parliament committee, like legal advisors for the head of the anti-corruption committee, Yegor Sobolev at that time, doing all of the draft laws for anti-corruption courts. So yeah, lawyers could do everything when they want to, and especially when we talk about such important thing for Ukraine right now as confiscation of frozen Russian money. Thank you so much. Oh, well, you are the most disciplined panelists I've ever seen on URC and on this conference, because we already have like 15 minutes for Q&A. And I know that you are not prepared for that, but could you please give your key message to the audience for 10 seconds, for like 2 sentences, the key message, what is very important and what's the most important about the future transparent reconstruction of Ukraine. The key message on your own to the audience. So who'd like to start to do that? Alexei.
Defense policy is upstream. Donor community and civil society should focus on that.
Thank you. Gavin?
Institutionalized dream.
Thank you. Got it?
Maybe something along the lines of corruption in Ukraine now is at an inflection point, much like the fight we had against COVID. When we saw COVID was ubiquitous, we all struggled with it, but we had vaccines. The vaccines worked. We had to make sure that we use the vaccines to overcome this issue. And then we saw the light at the end of the tunnel.
Thank you, Yukhani. Tatiana.
If you want to get results, you have to pay for it. So make Russia pay.
Thank you so much. I also would like to have to give a big thanks to our reporter right now, to Maxim Kluchar. He's from USAID and the CDO Pro Integrity Program, a technical advisor, and he's an expert on designing and driving programming on corruption prevention, digital transformation, and civil engagement to the reconstruction right now at that moment. Thank you, Maxim, so much. And I will be very thankful if you'll check that QR code and visit our sister workshop on Friday evening. Yeah. Before the Q&A, I would like to give a big thanks to our guests today. We have today a Minister of Liechtenstein on infrastructure and justice. And I know that you have a few questions to the panelists. Dr. Graciela Marok-Wachter. Yeah, so we are very grateful that you are with us today. And I know that you have a few questions, and also if the audience also will have some questions, I will be very thankful if you will give the information whom you are addressing that questions to the panelists. Thank you. So, Ms. Dr. Graciela, thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Well, I would like to thank the organizers for convening this important event. This provides us with yet another opportunity to reiterate Liechtenstein's continued strong solidarity with Ukraine and its people. Liechtenstein, together with its allies, has clearly condemned the aggression from the beginning. Despite the clear calls from international community, Russia continues to commit its atrocity crimes on a massive scale. Ensuring accountability for most serious crimes under international law is of utmost importance and a key priority for Liechtenstein. This includes, in particular, accountability for the crime of aggression. We are fully committed to contributing to the recovery and reconstruction of Ukraine. A national working group is currently preparing a proposal to Parliament for the long-term engagement of Liechtenstein in reconstruction of Ukraine. We plan to submit a proposal to Parliament soon this year with the aim to get multi-year and additional funding of reconstruction activities. We believe that the recovery process must be guided by the UN 2030 agenda and must take place in accordance with international law, democratic principles the rule of law, human rights, and good governance. And actually, I wanted to ask some questions with that regard, but most of them have already been answered. And I'm impressed of what Ukraine is doing in this context. And I get the impression that there is a young generation coming up in Ukraine who really helps in this process. And thank you for everything you do here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Grosella, for your support and for such kind words. Thank you so much. I think we could start a Q&A right now if somebody has a question, so please addressing them to the panelists. Thank you.
Hi, thank you all for an incredibly important panel. My name is Maz. I work with Atlas Corps. I'm originally from Poland, and so the matters of Ukraine are very close to my heart. And thank you so much for highlighting the importance of seizing Russian assets and using them for the reconstruction of Ukraine. And my question is, because as a layman and somebody watching from the outside, it seems that the process of not seizing the assets but really repurposing them to rebuild Ukraine is taking forever. And as that bystander, I can't stop but wonder whether the process is taking so long not just because of the bureaucratic machine, but also either reluctance or hesitation from some policymakers of creating a precedent that could be used against them in the future in terms of their assets that may be abroad, if not by Russia, then by other states that maybe in the future they will come in conflict with. Just posing a question: do you think that could be the case? Yes, no. Just asking as somebody who is not professionally in the area. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think I can answer that. Thank you. So yes, I would totally agree with you that this issue becomes something, I don't know, just something like theoretical, just theoretical games. Just let's talk about it, who is like the better lawyer, who can find more obstacles on this way, who may find like more pros or who may find more cons. Of course, some of the countries are talking about like future conflicts, just okay, just we are cautious with this, we want just if you can do that, but like an ad hoc instrument only for Ukraine. But I think it's quite an excuse, because we are talking about, some of them are talking, okay, we are afraid, Germany, we are afraid that we just can get like some suits because they have the precedents, and we can be made and forced to pay reparations for the World War II. But it's like, it's not the real reason, because of course we have Poland, we have Italy cases, they are trying to sue them, but still the theory and the concept of countermeasures is about stopping the violation of international law today, right now. Just you can act and like violate the international law to stop the ongoing violation of international law. It's more about the policy. It's more about business, to be honest. Just like for this last 2 years, what I see is my perspective. It's all about business, because like Germany, France, and some other countries, they have ties and business ties with Russia. So those who have these ties, it's so hard to break these ties. That's why we have to work on this. And the very recent decision of G7 on giving credit for like this $50 billion, it's not about the confiscation of using this principle. It's still not it. But it's the way forward. It's the like intermediate step for using Russian money. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Do we still have questions from the audience? Please. Sure.
Thank you very much. This is to the panel in general, so sorry, whomever wants to reply to this question. I work for an organization that's been quite involved in investigating flows of Russian money into Europe and oligarchs and so on. And it is really interesting how this concept of national security and corruption being quite intermingled, and we've talked about corruption in Ukraine, but also a topic that hasn't come out maybe as much is corruption within the Europe and European Union, how money flows into real estate in London, lack of transparency with beneficial ownership registries across Europe. I mean, we have the Minister of Justice of a European country here, but I'm sure that this goes for many others. Like what systemic measures other than confiscating Russian assets can European countries do in order to tackle corruption and tackle these national security threats that the Russian invasion poses? Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe
I don't want to monopolize.
except that Tatiana, who could, Gavin, Alexei, and then Tatiana. Thank you.
So you were asking about other measures. So I think, well, let's look at our hosts in Lithuania. Let's look at our host, Lithuania, right? So Lithuania has recognized that kind of corruption could be used strategically to undermine democracy. So treating, if you like, that we heard from the Special Investigations Bureau, understanding that effectively this is a national security issue to harden ourselves as democracies against like illicit financial flows and corruption used strategically to undermine our institutions, our own trust in government, feels really important. So I think the way Lithuania articulates that on the main stage is really powerful. So I think that's one thing, that's a strategy, and then within that there's a whole load of different tactics. There's a really nice example in the UK, which was a cross-parliamentary group of people put together an economic crime manifesto that looked at not only Russian assets, but economic crime in the UK's role and the UK Crown dependencies and British Virgin Islands and elsewhere's role in money laundering around the world and what the UK can do in terms of leadership. Obviously, beneficial ownership is super important, but I think treating it as a strategic anti-corruption priority is probably the way to go, especially for Europe, especially given kind of Russia's malign influence on European institutions and deliberately provoking them.
I agree with everything you said. I have an anecdote to tell you. I was talking with people from the intelligence community of the United Kingdom, and I was asking, how did you miss it? And they told me, off record of course, that, Alexei, you know, in our statute, we need to intervene when something is happening against national interest. And these people were bringing money in, first thing, and second thing, and money in seems like a benefit, right? And second thing is, I'm like, but they were corrupting political elites, weren't they? I'm like, yeah, but you know what? We are not allowed to even look at MPs. So we just, they're not our clients. We don't look at them. We're prohibited to. So we couldn't do anything about it. So that's just an anecdote about, but like on a more practical and serious notes, because like these things just don't do them, right? Do something else. I was at an event in London, which was focused on Russian illicit finance. So like researching Russian illicit finance is a thing. There are papers. They're fascinating. So I think like everybody should read them, and then you would understand what's the toolkit, how it works, how it worked in the past. And therefore, once you understand that, you can better appreciate the security risk, and you can better fight against it. Thank you.
Thank you. Tatiana, any anecdotes of seriousness?
I have anecdotes, I have seriousness, but still, I totally agree with two other panelists, and why? Because it's a strategy. It was a Russian strategy. It's like we have geopolitics, we have geoeconomics, and it's above geoeconomics. And talking about UK, talking about Europe and European countries, we have great, really great. legislation, like a piece of legislation EU newly adopted, directives. They are talking about seizing, like criminalizing the circumvention and violation of sanction regimes. They're talking about asset recovery, but the problem is that the very same problem, these offices responsible for investigation of sanction violations are super under-resourced. So US has like the best practice there, but to be honest, what is going on in UK, in EU, is really in the poor level. So that's why we always have this legislation perspective and practical perspective. With those resources, you cannot implement it efficiently. We can talk about it, but we cannot implement it. It's like from the one side, from another side, of course, there must be always someone who push for the implementation, who push for giving more resources. And if some companies, it's all about like just business. If some companies, if some people are interested in not giving more resources, not pushing for giving more resources for that, the state of the game is what we have now. That's the answer.
Thank you. Yuhani.
So I certainly agree with everything else that was said. I think the overall summary would be to say we have to be more like Ukraine in Europe, and even just to stir on the discussion at the end, maybe even to be a little bit more like Russia. Careful, I know what I'm saying, but I'll qualify what I'm saying, which is that Russia has gone to a war economy. We have not. We think we can live life as normal. We think maybe a few times a year we have to have some political battles about finding some money for Ukraine, and then we can just do what we want. And this is absurd. Like, this world is gone. It's no longer there. And so we have to do everything we possibly can to mobilize resources, and we're absolutely not doing that. Of course, the Russian assets, I completely agree, they need to go to Ukraine. Many questions about how to make that happen. We haven't done the homework to increase the likelihood that it won't be challenged in courts and that the money is irreversibly going to Ukraine. There are many more things we can do in that regard. You were talking about criminalizing sanctions evasion, a crucial element there that will help. Many other things, beneficial ownership, transparency, certainly resourcing, making sure that Ukrainian assets that have been from Ukrainian oligarchs, politicians that have been stuck in the West for a long time are finally going to go home. This is not Russian assets, right? These are Ukrainian assets that should have gone to Ukraine a long time ago, but are still in Europe. There are so many paths that we need to pursue, and we need to do that because we are in a war economy and we are at war. But we choose to not believe that for some reason that is beyond my understanding.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I saw the sign like that from the corner of the audience. Well, at the end, I would only like to say that on behalf of the whole civil society of Ukraine, we are doing so much for the future transparent reconstruction of Ukraine, for the creation of digitalized system, and the government also does a lot. And I would like to thank you for your countries, thank you for your governments, thank you for your embassies, thank you for your support that you are providing for the last couple of years to Ukraine and for Ukrainian civil society. And thank you so much for your attention that you visited our panel. Thank you.
Thank you.